Welcome to this explainer. Today we're doing something really fascinating. We're stepping right into the eerie, dead silence of the 1908 Siberian taiga. We're going to investigate one of the absolute greatest unsolved cosmic mysteries in human history, the Tunguska event. This was a day the sky literally exploded, leaving behind over a century of questions, completely bizarre clues, and a landscape that was forever scarred.
Okay, let's set the scene. Imagine it's the morning of June 30, 1908. You're fast asleep in a skin tent, just 30 kilometers from ground zero. That was the terrifying reality for two Epochs brothers. They were violently woken up. One of them, Chuchancha, recalled it like this. Suddenly, a bright light like a second sun appeared. At the same moment, a strong agdalan, or thunder, crashed. They were literally thrown to the ground by hurricane-force winds from an invisible source.
And the sheer sensory terror of this thing? It wasn't just some quick, localized flash. Another eyewitness, Anna Yakovlevna, remembered, the whole sky was red, and not only the sky, everything around was red. The sound is like bells, like beating on iron. Wow. It was an overwhelming barrage of seismic tremors and blinding red-hot light that completely shattered the morning calm. It wasn't just loud, it was a physical force shaking the earth itself.
To truly wrap our heads around the scale of this force, we've got to look at this staggering number, 2,150. That is how many square kilometers of dense Siberian forest were completely leveled. We are talking about roughly 80 million trees instantly toppled. The shockwave was so immense it shattered windows 200 kilometers away. And get this, its atmospheric pressure waves were registered all the way over in London. We're looking at an explosion equivalent to 10 to 15 megatons of TNT.
Section 2. The missing crater. We have a devastating blast, but where exactly is the impact? And that right there is the question that absolutely baffled early investigators. Where's the crater? Now, what's really interesting about this explainer is the massive twist in the story. So, when Soviet geologist Leonid Kulik finally fought his way through this brutal terrain to reach the epicenter in 1927, he fully expected to find a massive meteorite crater. But instead, he found absolutely nothing. No crater at all. Just a swampy bog. Now take a look at this eerie, radial outline of the leveled forest. This is famously known as Fast's butterfly. You can see this butterfly-shaped devastation pattern spreading outward, but right at the very center where all those lines converge, Kulik just found that marshy bog instead of a huge cosmic strike zone. How on earth do you flatten 80 million trees without an impact point? Well, the clues at the center were even more haunting. Inside an 8-kilometer area directly at the epicenter, the trees actually hadn't fallen at all. Instead, they were scorched, stripped of all their branches, and left standing perfectly upright like dead telegraph poles. This bizarre phenomenon is actually a huge forensic clue. It points directly to a massive mid-air burst. So whatever this object was, it detonated 5 to 10 kilometers up in the sky, sending a shockwave straight down. Section 3. Suspects. Asteroids to aliens. Over 100 hypotheses for a cosmic crime scene. Because there was no physical space debris found, the door was blown wide open for theories, and we really need to impartially look at all the suspects here. From mainstream science, we have a stony or iron meteorite exploding in the atmosphere, or maybe an icy comet core that just completely vaporized. But of course, the total lack of evidence sparked some wild ideas too. Back in 1946, Alexander Kazantsev proposed it was the nuclear explosion of an alien spacecraft. And later on, scientists even suggested the annihilation of an antimatter meteorite. Let's look at a fascinating earthly theory involving none other than Nikola Tesla. The so-called death ray hypothesis points out that Tesla was actually testing his massive Tesla coil at the exact time of the blast. He was supposedly trying to broadcast electricity all the way to the Arctic Circle using terrestrial waves. The story goes that his experiment blew up a nearby generator amid this artificial lightning storm. And while the timing is an incredible coincidence, we have to note this theory ultimately lacks a scientific mechanism to explain the specific, widespread destruction we see in Siberia.
Returning to the mainstream scientific community, the primary debate remains strictly impartial between two main cosmic culprits, a comet or an asteroid. The comet theory suggests a fragile, icy body that entirely vaporized upon entry, and this perfectly explains the unusually bright nights and noctilucent clouds reported all over Europe in the days after the event. On the flip side, the asteroid theory argues for a compact 50 to 100 meter stony body that entered at Mach 80 and just disintegrated under the immense atmospheric pressure. Both fit the data, but honestly, both leave questions unanswered.
Section 4.
mutations and magnetic storms, the bizarre biological and atmospheric aftermath.
You've got to consider this baffling timeline recorded in Irkutsk. 7 hours before the blast, the local geomagnetic field was completely calm, nothing unusual. But just 6 minutes after the explosion, the magnetic intensity abruptly spiked. It reached its maximum peak intensity 26 minutes later, and it took a full 5 hours for the magnetic field to finally calm down and return to normal. Now, this kind of localized 5-hour magnetic storm has zero parallel in normal meteor strikes, but it perfectly mimics the electromagnetic effects we see during high-altitude nuclear tests.
Adding to the suspense, researchers discovered some seriously bizarre biological anomalies in the area. They found radioactive fallout peaks, clearly dated to 1908, right in the local wood. They observed highly accelerated tree growth for the tree specimens that actually survived the blast. And, fascinatingly, they noted an unusual increase in 3-needle pine clusters instead of the standard 2-needle clusters, right near the epicenter's trajectory. These clues strongly suggest some unknown stress factor or electromagnetic radiation deeply affected the local biology.
Section 5. The Lake Cheko Anomaly. Could there be a hidden collapse crater in the Siberian taiga?
So, mapped extensively during a 1999 expedition, Lake Cheko sits just 7 kilometers from the epicenter. It's 53 meters deep with an unusually steep, funnel-like morphology. But even more suspicious is its elliptical shape, which perfectly points right back toward the explosion's epicenter. It's incredibly deep for a standard floodplain lake in this specific region, which leads some modern scientists to wonder, is this where a fragment of the Tunguska object finally landed?
Researchers point to a fascinating mechanical comparison here. A fragment of the Tunguska body might have hit the soft Siberian permafrost at a relatively low speed. If you look at the Caracas meteorite impact in Peru, it hit soft, muddy ground, and it behaved very much like an underground nuclear collapse crater. In both of these soft impacts, the energy gets trapped underground, creating this deep funnel without a raised rim. And Lake Cheko perfectly matches this exact collapse crater profile.
And dendrochronology, which is the study of tree rings, provides what some researchers call a smoking gun. When scientists looked at the cross-sections of trees living near Lake Cheko, they noticed a dramatic pattern. The trees experienced massive growth suppression right around 1908, but then that was followed by a sudden, vigorous growth spike. The fact that trees sitting directly on the lake's current shoreline show this pattern, suddenly lacking competition from other trees, strongly supports the theory that this lake had a sudden, violent birth during the Tunguska event.
Now, you might be wondering, why does a century-old explosion in some remote part of Siberia matter to us today? Well, it's because the Tunguska event remains the ultimate paradigm for cosmic airbursts. Understanding the mechanics of this exact event directly influences our modern planetary defense strategies. It is the primary reference point driving asteroid mitigation missions by NASA and the European Space Agency right now. By studying Tunguska, we are literally learning how to protect our own planet from future near-Earth objects.
As we wrap up this explainer, the exact nature of the Tunguska object is still suspended somewhere between fragile comets, stony asteroids, and the haunting unknown. With no final, universally accepted answer, we're left to look at the dark waters of Lake Cheko and that sprawling taiga and wonder, what secrets are still buried down there in the silent Siberian permafrost, just waiting to be discovered? Thank you so much for exploring this incredible mystery with me.